Hi students, how you doing? So today we're going to be talking about our reciprocal functions here. So our cosecant, secant, and cotangent functions as far as graphing. So our learning objectives, students will be able to graph secant, cosecant, and cotangent functions on the coordinate plane. And there's our standards for today. Okay, so we want to graph, and sorry for the math type doesn't always work well with PowerPoint, but we've got y equals 3 times the cosecant of pi x. Now remember, cosecant, so cosecant of x is the same thing as 1 over sine x. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to graph the sine x of this function. So remember, the period for sine is going to be 2 pi. So this is going to be 2 pi over the b value, and remember the b value is the coefficient of your x. So this would be 2 pi over pi, so my period is going to be 2. My amplitude is the absolute value of the coefficient, so the absolute value of 3 is 3. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to graph, and I'll graph it in green, and I'll just put the circles here. I'm going to graph the sine graph. So if I were to graph this, if this was y equals 3 times the sine of pi x, this is what I would do. So remember, sine always starts at the origin, and then we go up to our amplitude, so I'd go up to 3, back down to negative 3, back up. Going to the left, we'd have down here at negative 3, back up to 0, up to positive 3, and back down. Okay, now the reciprocal means that we're going to be flipping it, right? So now let's think about it. This right here, if I have this point right here at 0, this is 0 over 1. So when we flip it, it's going to become 1 over 0. So anywhere I have a 0 on my sine graph is actually going to be an asymptote because it's undefined there. So I've got an asymptote right here, I have an asymptote right here, I have an asymptote right here. I'd have an asymptote right here and have an asymptote right here. Alright, so now normally the sine graph would look like this, right? But since it's the reciprocal function, we're going to go the opposite way. So I'm going to have a point right here, but this is going to go up. Down here, this is going to go down. Right here, this is going to go up. Right here, this is going to go down. Okay, now my period, let's go back to the period. My period is 2. So remember, to get the x value, take 1/4 of your period. So that's going to be 1/2. So every single one of these tick marks is going to be 1/2. So this is going to be 1/2. This would be 1. This would be 3/2. This would be 2. This would be negative 1/2. This would be negative 1. This would be negative 3/2. This would be negative 2. So we need to make sure we include all of that. All right, good. Let's take a look at our next graph. All right, so we have y equals negative 2 times the cosecant of 4x. Okay, so we start off here with my period. So my period is going to be 2 pi over 4. So my period is pi halves. My amplitude is going to be the absolute value of negative 2, which is 2. Now, there's a negative in front, so this says we have to reflect over the x-axis. Okay, so I'm going to start off with my sine graph, and I'll do that in green. So normally I'd start right here. I can't reflect that because the reflection of 0 is still 0. And then normally I would go up to 2, right? But I have to reflect it over the x-axis, so now I'm going to go down to negative 2. I'd go up to 0, up to positive 2, back here to 0. Going to the left, I would go up to 2, back down to 0, down here in negative 2, back up to 0. All right, so now to graph the cosecant graph, wherever this crosses the x-axis, those are asymptotes. So right here would be an asymptote, 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 asymptote. And then I'm going to have a point right here, that's going to go down. I have a point right here, that's going to go up. And have a point right here, that will go down. Have a point right here, that will go up. All right, let's get our tick marks. So remember, I got to take 1/4 of pi halves, which is going to be pi over 8. So every single one of my tick marks is going to be a pi over 8. So this is pi over 8. This would be 2 pi over 8, which is pi over 4, 3 pi over 8, and then 4 pi over 8, which is pi halves, which is my period. Going to the left, we'd have negative pi over 8, negative pi over 4, negative 3 pi over 8, and then negative pi halves. Okay, take a look at our next one here. We're going to move on to secant. So remember, secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So if I were to write that out, if we had secant of x, that's going to be 1 over cosine of x. So just like I did before, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sketch out the cosine graph, and then we're just going to flip that over. So we'll start off here. My period is going to be 2 pi over 1/2, which makes that 4 pi. My amplitude is going to be the absolute value of 2, which is 2. Okay, so if we graph out the cosine graph, normally I'd start at 0, 1, but my amplitude is 2, so I have to start at 0, 2. And then I'm going to go down to 0, down here to negative 2, back up to 0, back up here to positive 2. Remember, I'm sketching the cosine graph. Going to the left, we go down to 0, down here negative 2, back up to 0, back up to positive 2. Okay, now we want to graph the secant graph. So wherever our graph crossed the x-axis here, we're going to have a asymptote. And then we flip it over. All right, good. So last thing we need to talk about here is our tick marks. So we're going to have 1/4 of my period. So that's just going to be pi. So this would be pi, this would be 2 pi, 3 pi, and then 4 pi. Going to the left, negative pi, negative 2 pi, negative 3 pi, negative 4 pi. All right, and there's the fourth graph, so go ahead and pause that video. Don't look at that. Try that one by yourself there. All right, and then finally we're going to be looking at our cotangent graph. All right, so take a look here. We have y equals 1/2 times the cotangent of 2x. All right, so, and once again, remember cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent. All right, so my period for tangent is pi. So this would be pi over my b value, so my period is going to be pi halves. Now, if I were to sketch out the tangent graph, I would start right here at 0, and then I'd go up to my a value, which is 1/2. So 1/2 would be right here, and then normally I would have an asymptote, right? I'd go down here to negative 1/2 right here, and then normally I would have an asymptote. Okay, and then right here I'd have a point at negative 1/2, 0, up to 1/2, and then an asymptote. Same thing. This right here would normally be an asymptote. So then I'd have a point right here at 1/2, then 0, and then negative 1/2. Now, remember, just like we did with the other graphs, anywhere the original function has a 0, that now becomes an asymptote. So I have an asymptote right here. I have an asymptote right here. I have an asymptote right here. Where my original asymptotes were are now zeros. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and graph in our points. There we go. There's our cotangent graph. All right, try the last one by yourself. Go and pause the video and try it out. And there's our last graph. All right, good job today.